where we left off in our conversation about immigration. And I sort of kept it as homework light. We had discussed Canada's immigration system. We had talked about what the point system is. And we said that the point system is, well, can somebody unmute your mic and tell me kind of what the, let's pretend, when I say pretend, it is, let's pretend that there's a question on the evaluation tomorrow. And let's pretend it's worth 3 marks. And let's pretend the question is something along the lines of, what is the point system? How does it work? And what is it designed to do? Okay, so if you consider that as sort of a 3-mark question, which may or may not appear on the evaluation tomorrow, it will. How would we go about navigating that question based on what you know thus far? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute your mic. We can just sit here. Hey, I don't care. I'm getting paid either way. I was going to say something's in the chat. Good, because I was going to say, don't test me. I will run out the clock. So it is, yes, it's a system used to find out people's skills, before they enter Canada. And I'll rephrase that slightly, because if you just want to visit Canada, okay, Canada is under normal circumstances, and actually, well, don't even get me started on the fact that the federal government chose to really not close borders in regards to the COVID pandemic, while simultaneously the Ontario governments had to tell people to stay home. We won't talk about that right now. But you don't need, special certification to visit Canada as a guest or as a tourist. Okay. But if you want to come to live in Canada, if you want to make Canada your home, there is a process that you need to go through. And again, we're not really talking about this today specifically, but there is a difference between immigration and citizenship. Okay, we touched on that in the last class. To immigrate to Canada is the first step. Okay, to come into Canada, to become what you would call a permanent resident, you need to, under normal circumstances, apply under the points system. And really, it is a way of screening to see if you have basically the skills and the abilities to contribute to our economy and to our society in a meaningful way. And it's kind of like a job interview for Canada. Okay, that's what we said it's all about. It's based on, and you can see the criteria here, and I see more things in the chat. You need 67 points to pass. It's not a knowledge-based test. And these are the criteria. Now, let's see who has the fastest Google/Siri fingers. Some of you are like, what? We don't even have to use fingers. Like, Mr. Seidenberg, are you telling me you still have a home button on your phone? I'm not answering that question. I actually didn't even know they got rid of them. So my 6S still works. So anyway, let's see who can come up with the quickest. You can consult government websites or immigration websites, or more than happy to help you. Sort of homework light. Let's fill this in. What are the point criterias under these categories? I can't believe I'm recording this. Again, this is going to be a pretty lame review video. So I will answer anything in the chat. And so I got a question about, how you get your phone to hold a charge. That's a very good question. I actually replaced the battery on my phone. I ordered a kit and watched a couple of YouTube videos and was able to take it apart and replace it. But as far as if you got the battery replaced, if it's not very good, you may want to check to see, if you still have your receipt and where did you go? Because if it's been, less than a month and, you think it might be a faulty battery, you may have grounds to get a replacement and get them to, fix it, because sometimes those things happen. But I don't know any, magic tricks to sort of jury rig, a battery to improve its capabilities. So that would sort of be, I would search through your receipts if you have them. Because yeah, that's frustrating. But hopefully, I mean, depending on where you got it replaced or repaired, they may be willing to make it right. I know, for example, I had to take my bike to a local, bike shop because I was actually swapping out the tires and there was a flat in the one, and it was a sort of a different repair than I would normally do because I haven't fixed a bike tire before. But they fixed it for me and everything seemed fine. But then a couple days later, it was flat. And so I went back and explained, and yeah, they fixed it again. No questions asked. It turns out, I guess what they had installed was a faulty inner tube. So who knows, maybe you got a lemon, so to speak, in regards to the battery department. And so, okay, I see something in here for work. For 1 year, 9 points, 2 to 3 years, 11 points, etc. So work experience, you're saying there's a maximum of 15 points in work experience? Is that yes? Maybe they've adjusted that. And I see a maximum of 25 points in education. And we'll see if we can get this to add up to 100. Because again, they do sometimes adjust the numbers. Oh, maybe they've adjusted the age numbers. I think it used to go to 10, but now I see someone saying it's to 12, and we can again reconfirm this. What about language proficiency? Yeah, adaptability, that sounds right. 10 points there. Language proficiency is kind of a tricky one to figure out because yes, there's a maximum of 28 points total, but that's if you're fluent in both English and French. And to tell you the truth, and you might say, well, Mr. Seidenberg, I mean, you don't even seem particularly confident in all of these numbers. You're right. I don't know for sure. I know the general idea, but they change them from time to time. Here's the point that I want to make. I'm not actually concerned about you memorizing how many points each category is worth. Okay, that doesn't really matter to me. What I do want you to see is that there is key criteria that is being evaluated. And based on the level of education you've achieved, your language proficiency, how much work experience you have, age, this actually goes back to grade 9 geography when we talk about population pyramids. And I think we talked about it even in the last class. The reason why you wouldn't get any points if you're under the age of 18 is because you're a minor and you're actually what we call a dependent, meaning you need someone to take care of you. And also, if you're over 50, if I'm not mistaken, you don't really get any points either. And that's because you're getting towards the end of the time in which you would be working. Now, I realize you might say, well, Mr. Seidenberg, isn't 50 the new 40? Which I guess would mean 60 is the new 50. What does that even mean? That's a great question, fictional student who asked that. And really what that is saying is that by and large, people are living longer. Life expectancy has increased dramatically. And because of that, when someone, 30, 40 years ago, turns 60, um, that was, getting towards the latter end of their life. Because if you look at life expectancies, even back into the 1960s and into the 1970s, the reason why retirement was at age 65 is because statistically you'd be dead by 70. Well, now people are living well into their, 80s and 90s. And again, not everybody. I don't want to be, glib, especially if you've lost loved ones, and not everybody lives well into their 80s and 90s. But generally speaking, if someone was to die in their 70s, we would be concerned in the sense that we'd say, like, oh my goodness, what happened? That seems so young. Whereas if somebody died in their 70s 40 years ago, it would be very commonplace. It would be like, yeah, that's what happens. And if people made it into their 80s, it was sort of seen as like, oh, wow, you are really old. And it's interesting, actually. Like, I don't know if you can see the mug I'm drinking from. It has the character from the Golden Girls, Rose, which is played by Betty White. And Betty White is sort of also kind of, internet famous. She's sort of taken on this mythical persona, similar to like Queen Elizabeth II, just these immortal beings that seem to live well into their 90s and seem to have, no signs of slowing down. But the point is that you don't work forever. And so once you reach a certain point, you lose the points for your age, because it is expected that you'd be retiring fairly soon. So there's a question here. Am I going to post this document? Short answer, yes. Now, am I going to post the one that has it all typed and filled out like I'm doing now? Again, the answer is yes. Why? Because I like you guys. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not actually going to go back and check to see if all of these numbers are correct. Okay, because like I said, I don't really care. The overall point here is you need to achieve a certain level of points to pass. And it's not a knowledge-based test, right? It's not about how many facts can you tell me about Canada. It's basically like a job opportunity. Now, we are going to actually now, as we look at globalization and global citizenship, and we will come back and we'll fill this out, I'm actually going to switch gears a little bit here. I'm going to pause the recording. So I'll say this as an introduction to the video on the story of human rights. Whenever you are trying to summarize over 10,000 years of human history into a 10-minute video, there are going to be a lot of glaring omissions, and you're going to miss out on a lot of nuance. So this video has some important points, but at the same time, I don't, watch it as like, I wouldn't watch it to study for a history test. That's all I'm saying. The over summary of, and then some king thought, hey, some people should have rights too, except not everybody agreed. And that it's, like I said, it's a summary. And so we're going to work our way through, so what are human rights? Well, first it's important to define, what humans are. And, humans are not just creatures, specifically if you get into going back to biology, kingdom, phylum, etc., classifications, species, Homo sapiens, right? And what are rights? Rights are things that you are legally or morally entitled to. So then by definition, human rights are the rights, the moral and legal entitlements to members of the human race, right? That's kind of the idea. Now, it's kind of a trick question with ancient civilizations. Who had rights and how were they protected? Well, there really was no such thing as rights. And I've written something here, might makes right. And I'm not saying I believe in that, but I'm saying that that is the way that it was. And that basically means if you are stronger than anybody you come into contact with, well, then you can kind of force your will upon them, because what are they going to do about it? Right? If you're strong and powerful, you could call the shots. And this is again why, and we have seen, and I'm glad that we have seen this, that it has changed, that now, we emphasize other skill sets. If you look at, historic, tribal leaders, the really, one of the biggest things that was emphasized was brute strength, because you had to be able to basically, beat up anybody that you came into contact with. And if you were the strongest, then people would kind of follow alongside you. And that's actually still very true in the animal kingdom, right? You get into the idea, if you look at social creatures like wolves, wolf packs, the alpha male is the strongest wolf in the pack. And basically they remain that until another wolf can challenge the alpha. And then if the alpha is ever beaten, well, then the one that beat the alpha becomes the new leader. And that's basically everybody else just sort of follows along, says, okay, I guess that's who's in charge. So historically speaking, there really was no human rights. If you were in with the right group, then you were probably pretty well off, because you had some protection, kind of like almost being in a gang. As we moved, and again, we're fast forwarding a lot, but as we eventually make it into the Roman era, and what's interesting, I like talking about the Romans, especially in my grade 11 law class, which is a course you should consider taking. Now, I'm not going to pretend that, the Romans were, like when we talk about some of their, legal history and what they developed, they were an incredible civilization. And yes, they did make great strides in trying to bring about the sense of equality amongst their subjects, the idea that it meant something to be a Roman citizen. In fact, actually, if you go back into the book of Acts, there's a great story where, the Apostle Paul, who was a really smart guy, he was, whipped and flogged in this one town. And then they basically said, all right, get out of here. And he said, oh, no, 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 no. You just, you whipped me, a Roman citizen, without a trial? No. And then you want me to go away quietly, And then when they found out he was a Roman citizen, they were like, oh, shoot, we just thought he was kind of a nobody. And so, again, I don't want to get on too much of a tangent here. Rome was also a society built on slavery, right? And oppression. And they, took over most of the known world. And in fact, I think if you look at the numbers, 2/3 of the people living under the Roman Empire were not Roman citizens. And, they still had things like, crucifixion, among other things. So I'm not saying that they were this advanced, utopian state of equality, but they did make great strides into the concept of a legal system. And actually, they were seen as one of the first civilizations to actually have lawyers as a profession, like it was kind of a job. And the idea of natural law was the idea of, and this is sometimes where we get into the philosophy of something that's called the social contract. The idea of, if I leave you alone and you leave me alone, we kind of don't mess with each other. We can kind of live in peace with one another. That seems to be something that can kind of work. I mind my own business, you mind your own business. I don't mean any harm to you, then you kind of leave me alone too. It's this sort of agreed upon idea. Even if people don't tell you to do it, that's sort of the concept of natural law. Unfortunately, those who were in power and then, moved into emperors, etc., were able to then, trample on that and basically say, you will do as I say, because now I am in charge, right? Greed, selfishness, corruption has a way of taking over. This is something we talked about in the importance of our democracy and protecting a democracy. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. So on the one hand, it can seem very attractive to have a leader who can just kind of snap their fingers and get stuff done. But, dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, are not great places to live because you don't actually have any rights, because you're really at the whim of whoever is in charge. Again, this isn't a history class, so you don't have to memorize this specific date. But this is a big deal for us in civics and also looking into grade 11 law. There was a document in 1215 that is known as the Magna Carta. And the idea of the Magna Carta was that even the king had to follow the rules. No one is above the law. Now, in this video, it makes it look like the king was sort of like, that seems like a good idea. Yeah, I'm going to sign that. No, the guy who signed it, King John, was not a very good king. He's kind of forced into it because he was such a bad king. They're like, listen, you're a train wreck. We're going to put this in place to basically hold you back from destroying everything. Now, again, this goes back over 800 years ago. And we see that the origins of the Magna Carta in, English history, Queen Elizabeth II is technically our head of states. However, it is ceremonial. Okay, she does not wield absolute power. She is a very powerful ceremonial figure, but at the same time, she can't just do whatever she wants. And in fact, when we look at how things happen in Canada, although she's on our money and is in our constitution, power is in the hands of Parliament, not in the hands of the monarch. So this was a question that they didn't actually answer in the video itself. So you would have had to sort of think critically about a previous conversation, which was globalization. And, how were European nations able to create such vast empires? Well, we talked about what is globalization. It's through technology, communications and transportation technology. So because they had the ships and because they had the weapons, it allowed them to go to areas of the world that did not have that type of technology and basically just steamroll in and be like, hey, guess what? We're in charge now. I'm going to be sharing another video with you very shortly. And it's going to talk to you a little bit about the United Nations. There's some myths and misconceptions about what the United Nations is all about. Some people look at the United Nations and say, well, isn't that supposed to be like a one world government? And, aren't there all these conspiracy theories that are out there and, these secret things? And even, with even the pandemic, there's a lot of people saying that, oh, that's why they're trying to vaccinate people because, they're trying to get microchips with 5G into people's bodies so that we'll all be zombies and then we'll just do it. You don't have to spend very much time on the internet to seek out. In fact, you often don't have to seek them out. They will often find you these grand conspiracy theories. But the best way that I can explain what the United Nations is, it isn't actually a one world government at all. Really, it's designed to be a place to meet. That's really kind of what it is. And this actually explains one of the reasons why sometimes people have trouble with the United Nations, because they think, oh, the UN doesn't really seem to get anything done. They seem to be a really ineffective government. Well, they're not really a government at all. It's kind of like, if you think about it, if you picture living on a street or like a court, and then, you set up tables in the middle of the court and all of the neighbors kind of come outside and sit around at the tables and discuss issues in the neighborhood to try to solve problems and strategize and come up with some ideas. That's kind of what the United Nations is all about. No one person is in charge. It's a opportunity for neighboring nations to come together to try to strategize, work out plans. And this is the purpose behind it. And again, I want to highlight it. Why do they exist? We want to prevent world wars, right? We don't want to have the death and devastation that we've seen, especially in the mechanized warfare of the first half of the 20th century, where especially if we look at civilian deaths, over 100 million people died in, the First and Second World War. And so the goal of the United Nations is to work towards maintaining international peace and security. And sometimes that happens through, it's amazing how many fights, if you just look at people, and I'm not talking about nations here, often if people are ready to fight, sometimes if you can just get them and sit down and, cooler heads prevail, give somebody a snack, right? Say, you're not you when you're hungry. Sometimes even just saying like, what's the problem here? Why do you want to then fight with this person? Well, they said this. Well, I didn't mean that. Well, okay, well, can we work this out? We can? Okay, fantastic. That's kind of what the United Nations is supposed to be. A means of preventing just nations going to war with one another, because historically speaking, that was kind of what you did, and in some cases, really terrible reasons. You'd have authoritarian regimes where it'd be like, hey, you know what? This one monarchy insulted me, so now I'm going to send a whole bunch of my troops of poor young men, with families, but I don't even care. I'm going to send them off to fight and die because some other leader in another country, insulted me. And so that's the sort of stuff we want to avoid. Now, they published this document. It's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what is the point of it? Its creation does not mean that all of a sudden, and they even joked about this in the video, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, no, not really. Right? What is the role of this document? What does it do? It's designed to be something to strive for. Right? It is a document that actually the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which came after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you'll see that there's a lot of similarities between them. And that's actually by design. It's because Canada has said we value what the United Nations is trying to do. We agree with that document. And so our own documentation is going to reflect the spirit of this document, the Universal Declaration that is supposed to apply to everyone. Now, again, they asked some tough questions. Well, if everybody has these rights, why is there still so much inequality and injustice in the world? There's not one answer for that. But I mean, if you wanted to look at, character traits, ignorance, apathy, selfishness, greed, corruption, these are the things, people not caring, people wanting more than others at the expense of others, willing to do whatever it takes in order to get ahead. That it's been around since the dawn of civilization. But those continue to persist. And as long as we have that, there is going to be inequality and there is going to be injustice. And so if we look at and I'm looking at the chat as well. Yeah, no, don't worry. You'll see we're getting there. The quote, it's a long quote. It starts off saying small places close to home, and then it goes on. You can rewatch the video if you like. Really, what is it saying? It's not talking about a geographic place. And this is actually kind of the launching again to the idea of active and global citizenship. What is the small places close to home? Spoiler alert, it's you, right? That's the idea. It's basically saying, having a document that says that people in the world have rights doesn't mean anything if nobody cares, right? If people do not live their lives in such a way that says, I believe in the value of this document, I believe in the worth of the human person, I believe that people in the world, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their race, require respect. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to be friends with everybody. It doesn't mean you're going to know everybody. But, the idea of everybody in the world deserves the same rights in regards to the freedom to speak their mind, the freedom to make their own choices, that they should not be controlled by an authoritarian government, that they should not be enslaved or denied things like an education. Those beliefs are only going to matter if people care. And it really is, just to wrap up, and if we look into the document that I'm going to be going back to, why are wisdom and compassion, both essential? Well, wisdom is one of the ways that I've heard it referred to is basically applied knowledge. right? As the old saying goes, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. It's one thing to have a bit of trivia or information, but you being able to effectively use that information, that's really where we get into the world of, the idea of wisdom. But compassion is also essential, because without wisdom, without know-how, you don't know what to do. And so you just cry a lot as an ineffective bystander, right? Maybe you care about other people, but you don't know what to do about it. It's kind of like being uninformed. An ineffective bystander is somebody who sees the wrong in the world and feels bad about it, but can't really do anything because they don't have the skill set or the knowledge base to apply and put into action a means of change. But without compassion, without a care for other people, you may actually be tempted to use the knowledge that you have to exploit other people. And this happens all the time. And this is something that where we talk about, the idea of a sweatshop. What is a sweatshop? And again, we could get into the, if you talk about, well, people only making $1 a day, but well, what is actually $1 worth in that part of the world? Maybe they're happy to have the job. And I realize there are arguments to be made back and forth for global trade and how it can lift people out of poverty. I realize, again, there's some nuance to it. But we have to understand that without compassion, you just being really smart means that you're really good at taking advantage of people. And that's also something that historically has happened a lot, where, colonial powers would go in and be like, well, we have the power, we have the money, we have the technology. We can take advantage of the fact that this population, is largely uneducated and desperate. Sweet. Well, we can take advantage of that, for our own gain. Right? That doesn't encompass a spirit of compassion that fits into what it means to be a global citizen. And so again, part of this course, like why we're, kind of wrapping up what we're trying to do here, why I care about active citizenship. I'm not just trying to teach you how to improve your own lives. I want you to live the best life that you can, but I don't want you to live a life that is devoid, meaning without care for other human beings, right? I don't want you to just be some super smart, selfish sociopath that, hey, look at me in my, $500 million yacht. I've really made it. Look at me. Everybody cheer for me and how good things are for me. That's not the sort of future that I want for you. Now you might say, wait, you don't want us to be rich? I didn't say that. But when we talk about richness, and this gets back into the spirit of what Jesus talks about in, treasures in heaven versus treasures on earth, I don't measure success by just how much money you have in your bank account. I mean, it's nice to have money. I mean, if somebody said, hey, Mr. Seidenberg, do you want this check for $1 million? Yes, I do. I will take that. That would be fantastic. But life is more than just money. And we want to make sure that as we're trying to build success for you in the future, we're trying to give you the tools that you need in order to succeed. We never want you to forget that you are part of the human race, that you are part of a larger community of people. And as the old saying goes, don't forget where you came from. We want to make sure that if you are able to elevate yourself into a position of power, that you also have the heart to use that position of power to actually make the world a better place, rather than just exploit it for your own selfish gain. So I'm going to pause the recording for just a second. So as I had mentioned before, I will be posting this video as well as this document. I will give this one to you. What is tomorrow looking like? Well, at 10 o'clock, because it is the Friday schedule, the shortened schedule, I will be present here via Zoom. And if you have questions, if you want to ask me questions about the unit, you can log in and you can talk to me. I will be here. I will be here basically the whole 45 minutes. Think of it as a tutorial session, if you like. I will also be providing you with the unit evaluation, which you have basically an entire calendar week to do. I never really designed it to be, I'm not saying it's homework over the long weekend. Like, really, I would just get it done tomorrow. I know that you do have a careers evaluation, but I would just get it done. Submit it so that then you're not carrying it over with you and you can get a jump start on your long weekend. So I'm going to work my way through this. Again, if we look into developed versus developing nation, what are some of the differences? I'm not really going to be asking you any questions on that, but you can look at things like, GDP, which is known as gross domestic product. You can look at energy consumption, which is, how much electricity is kind of produced and consumed. Developed nations use a lot more. You can also look at adult literacy, which is sort of a quick means of looking at the status of education, whether or not you have 100% adult literacy or, a lower number can indicate developed versus developing. You can also look at life expectancy, which again is if on average, if you had two countries and in one country, the average life expectancy is 80 and in another one, it's 50. Well, that's telling you there are factors at play and numerous factors, probably especially related to things like access to medical care, etc. On average, if a life expectancy is higher, that is an indication of a developed nation. In fact, for all of these, if it's high GDP, high energy consumption, high adult literacy, and high life expectancy, that is basically a recipe for what we would call a developed nation. Whereas if it is low in these four characteristics, it shows that that nation is in transition and is what we would deem as a developing nation. We've talked about this one. It's the danger of having knowledge but no compassion. Don't care. Exploit. Right? You take advantage of people. Right? You're smart. You can pull a fast one on someone. And often we justify it in our minds because they're like, well, I mean, if they're too stupid to know better, I mean, that's their problem, right? Why should I be, punished just because I'm smart? Taking advantage of someone doesn't make you smart, right? You might say, but I am smart. Intelligence and having the ability to take advantage of someone requires a certain level of craftiness, I suppose. But taking advantage of people is really what exploitation is. You're not doing something in a fair or honorable way. And again, sometimes people will justify it, say, well, hey, it's their problem. But that's one of the dangers of having knowledge but no compassion. You can't put yourself in the position of the other person. It goes back to the idea of the golden rule. Would you want someone to take advantage of you? And you say, well, no. But sometimes if you have been taken advantage of, then that can sort of make it seem like, well, it's a tough world out there. I've been taken advantage of, so now I'm going to take advantage of people too. My hope would be if you have been taken advantage of, it'll actually create empathy where you're like, I don't like that feeling. I'm not going to do that to others. Of course, what's the danger of having compassion but no knowledge? Ineffective bystander, right? You care. There's nothing you can do about it. Again, we have a previous class that I've recorded about what globalization is and what makes it possible. We've also discussed those crash course videos about how globalization brings the world together, which I would say is a net positive. But at the same time, there are huge challenges that we're going to have to navigate. If we look at universal human rights, and again, what is genocide? Well, genocide is, and I'm not going to get you to, define it on the unit test tomorrow, but genocide is the ultimate discrimination. Again, because what is discrimination? We talked about that earlier. Basically, the unfair treatment of a person. It is the systemic targeting of a specific group of people for extermination because of who they are. Genocide is not a random thing. Genocide is not just, oh, you mean like a lone gunman, you know, shooting up a plaza or something like that? No. Genocide, what makes it the ultimate in discrimination, is that this isn't just a person or a small group of people. It is basically a state-sponsored, so like a government-controlled, organized targeting of a specific group for extermination, meaning death, because of who they are. Okay, the best example that we can give based on the curriculum that you have already, that you look at grade 10 history, is to look at the Holocaust of the Second World War. It's systemic, right? What is it? It is a targeted group of people for extermination. It's not random civilian casualties. It's not like, oh, look, a bomb went off. No, it is the rounding up of people, classification of people. Who are you? What's your bloodline? What's your ethnicity? Oh, you're part of the one that we're okay. Well, that it's seeing people as subhuman, meaning not even seeing them as members of the human race. And that's actually where the justification for the extermination comes in, because if you can trick your brain into thinking, well, they're not really people, then it's easy to shut off your conscience. This is again why human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and education is so important, to prevent this sort of thing from ever happening again, right? And by the way, if you do research, you'll see that the Holocaust of the Second World War is by no means the only genocide that has ever taken place. In fact, there's a movie that I used to show in civics. We do not have the time for now. There's a movie called Shake Hands with the Devil that actually looks at the Rwandan genocide of the 90s. That's right, the 1990s, the Space Jam era. I know that seems like ancient history for you. But yeah, someone put in the Rwandan genocide, exactly, of the 1990s. And this was, where you have a nation divided. And some people just called it a civil war. Well, it wasn't just a civil war. You had people turning on tribal groups of people because of the blood in their veins, right? Because of who they were, not because of anything that they had done. And why did you have this, mass cheering in the streets? Because people who are committing a genocide think they're doing the right thing. They think that they are cleansing or healing their land by removing their nation, basically, of an inferior group of people, right? That's, again, what makes genocides so terrifying, is because if you're on the side of the genocide, you don't see yourself as the bad guy. You don't. You see yourself on the side of right, trying to restore, a nation to a potential former glory. And that's why it's, again, education is so important, because we don't want to have these things happen again. And again, what is the primary role of the United Nations? We see that in the other note that we took, to maintain international peace and security, to try to prevent those sort of things from ever happening again. All of these remaining questions were answered earlier in this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to leave them blank on this document, although I'm posting it for you. But if you have been following along, you will be able to glean the answers from this recording, which I'm going to give to you in just a moment. Now, I realize I am, a short few minutes away from wrapping up for today. And so really what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with a couple of other YouTube videos. They're only, 2 to 3 minutes in length. I'm going to leave them with you. One is, just talking about what the United Nations is. And I'm going to post that. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to stop the recording as well.